Hey, what's up guys? For those of you that don't know me, I have been a Challenger player since set 3. In this video, I'm going to be giving you guys a concise explanation on how to play in patch 14.10b if you want to climb. So there have been 2 patches since my last video. In 14.10, the TLDR is they buff for Warden, they buff for Sniper, they buff the early game Dryad units, they buff Lillia, but they nerf Trickshot, Silas, and Zyra. They basically felt like they overdid these nerfs, so they sort of kind of corrected them in patch 14.10b by nerfing Warden, Lillia, and Syndra and buffing for Trickshot. So this has resulted in a level 8 meta still. So there are a few level 8 comps that you can play around, but also a few reroll comps as well that includes hero augments. Basically, Sage Lillia is a new variant that's popped up. Very, very good. Sage Lillia is a comp that you can't really just try to hard force. It's more of like a variation of the Sage Silas tree. So like, for example, usually you just roll for like Silas, Morgana. You usually just pick up all the Lilias along the way and you flex between 2-star Morgana or 2-star Lillia, or you play both. Umbral, I didn't talk about in my last video, but I think Umbral +1 is really good, even especially if you get like Wrath of the Moon. Very good if you get like an Elune as an early game opener as well. Faded Syndra, still very, very good, even stronger if you have Faded +1. Ashe Flex. So Ashe, there are 2 new variants you can play around that are very, very good. So if you get Warden +1 or Sniper +1, you just hard force Ashe. I think getting Porcelain +1 early is not very good just because you can't abuse any broken 4 Porcelain breakpoints. Because to abuse 4 Porcelain, if you get a spat, you need to hit the Ashe early game, which is not going to happen. But it's very, very easy to fit in like 4 Warden, 4 Sniper towards the early and mid game. You have Keima Trickshot. I think Keima Trickshot is weaker than it is before. It's still good, but only if you get Fortune. Just because like I feel like Trickshot in general is like a weaker cap version of Ashe. And Keima really needs the extra resources from Fortune to be able to go 9. You also have Heavenly. This comp is pretty much only good with the Heavenly +1. If you don't get the Heavenly +1, I would probably try to stay away from it. In the reroll comps, you actually have like a few options. None of them are 3-star comps just because the 3-star odds are still fucked. But your options are basically going to be Kog'Maw, Zyra, Janna, Garen, and Duelists. So Zyra is a new reroll comp that has popped up. Basically, you instead of rerolling for like the Senna board, you reroll for Zyra for Ghostly, and you're primary tanking your Shen and your Aatrox instead. Janna is still the same. You reroll for Janna 3 and play into Dragon Lords. Garen is fucking broken right now. Storied Champion. If you get it at 2-1, the average placement of Storied Champion at 2-1 is a 3.81. That's fucking crazy. So if you get Storied Champion, just scout the lobby, see no one else is playing it, and then you play the traditional 1-cost reroll comp for Garen. This comp is good just because the only unit that actually matters is Garen 3, whereas Cog, you kind of need like Caitlyn, Kog'Maw, and Cho'Gath. And finally, if you had a Duelist +1, reroll Duelist is also very good as well. Let's go into the tier list. So in the tier list, we still have Legendary Fast 9. We have the Warden +1, play into Ashe, really high cap. We also have the Faded Dryad Flex board. I also think that I would say like some comps belong in here if you get like the right condition for it. So I would say like Storied Champion at 2-1 with a lot of Garens, S tier, Duelist +1, S tier I would say as well. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the S tier, and I think every other comp that I listed here belongs in the A tier. So Heavenly, I guess if you have Heavenly +1, this is probably S tier as well. Sage Flex, A tier, A tier. Umbral Flex, A tier, potentially A+ tier if you get Umbral +1 and Wrath of the Moon. Reroll Ghostly, very good comp if you need to stabilize at level 6. Reroll Cog is good if you have too much candy or if it's like an Econ Galaxy like Scuttle Puddle. And you finally have Reroll Janna. General Econ Guide, pretty much the same. And for Augments, I did update it to reflect the new meta. So check this out when you have time. I did not include Storied Champion, but Storied Champion should be in here as well. By the time this video is posted, I will be streaming, so would really appreciate it if you guys check my stream out and drop me a follow. I also have another YouTube channel where I post VODs on my gameplay and explain my thought process, so check that channel out as well. Without further ado, let's jump right into the guide. Alright, so before I jump into the comps, I want to first give you guys a TLDR of what the best openers that you want to be playing around the current patch are. I think this is important just because depending on the opener you have, it gives you a lot of direction into what units you want to hold and what items you want to go for from Carousel. And also is going to save you a lot of gold in the long run so you don't hold useless units on your bench. So in my opinion, I think the Giga opener of the current patch is going to be the 3 Faded Dryad opener. This is when you get a 2-star Yasuo, 2-star Ahri, Kindred, and a second Dryad unit, so you just start farming those Dryad stacks early. So getting the 2 Dryad is actually pretty important because it gives you a very, very strong late game, because by the time you get to stage 4, you're already going to have like 30, 40 stacks, and those stacks are going to win you even more fights at level 8, giving you like fucking 1000 HP per Dryad unit. In this opener, if you don't hit Yasuo 2, you could also get a Thresh from an Orb, which is still really strong. And you generally want to itemize the RE if possible, because it's way easier to hit RE2 than Kindred 2. But if you're on RE1, Kindred 1, then it's also fine to itemize the Kindred as well. Another opener you want to look out for is going to be the Darius opener. In the Darius opener, depending on your items, you could play into 2 different comps. If you have like the AP-ish items like Crown Guard, Adaptive Spark, you usually want to angle into the Umbral variant where you move these items into Silas. Where you have stuff like BT, Red Buff, GA, Titans, then you want to angle towards Heavenly Cain. And of course, if you have the Bruiser-ish items, depending on who you're closer to 2-starring, Darius or Kiana, you could choose to itemize like this, the respective unit. Another opener is going to be the Fortune opener. In my opinion, from the Fortune opener, you generally want to angle towards Ashe or Kaisa. I think Kaisa is pretty much only playable from the Fortune opener, just because I think Kaisa is generally a weaker comp than Ashe right now, because Ashe has a lot more options. And Kaisa just needs a lot more resources to stabilize at level 8, which Fortune does provide. And Fortune is a very smooth transition into Kaisa because you're not really replacing your entire board. Opener number 4 is going to be the Mythic opener. This is a great opener to play into Ashe/Lillia, and it's also a great opener to play into if you have Warden +1 or Sniper +1 early. So if you have Warden +1, pretty easy to play around this Alawi and play 2 more Wardens. And if you have Sniper +1, generally you just play around 1 Sniper early, random frontline, and then towards the late game you play around 4 Snipers. Last opener is going to be the Story Weaver opener. This is when you get like 3 Story Weaver early and you're playing around either the Zyra or the Sivir 2. If you have the Sivir 2, still I would prefer angling into towards Ashe, just because you play into Kaisa from this spot, like I said before. You don't have enough resources to stabilize at level 8 and then go 9. If you're playing around the Zyra, you have a few options. You can either flex into Sage, Silas/Lillia, or you can play into the level 6 reroll board where you're rerolling Zyra, Aatrox, and Shen. These are pretty much the 5 openers you want to default towards. If you don't have any of these openers, it's fine to just full open and then play for a level 3-2 roll down for a stable board into level 8. So the new comp that's popped up in the current meta is going to be Sage Lillia. So I think this comp is very good for a few reasons. Reason 1 is that it doesn't rely on any 5-cost units, and reason 2 is that this is sort of like a variation of an existing tree that you used to play around. So you actually want to play around this comp if you're flexing into the Sage Silas tree. Usually when you're playing Sage Silas, you're flexing between like Silas frontline, Annie frontline to hold all your frontline AP items. But for your backline, you previously only flexed around like Morgana, Azir. Now Lillia is in the mix as well, so it increases the strength of the Sage tree up by a lot. The good thing about this comp is that the synergies work out very, very nicely. So if you notice, the 3 mythic units you play are going to be these 3 units. It's pretty easy to fit in a second Arcanist and Warden because you're just playing Alawi. But you also play around Morgana as well, which gives you Ghostly and Sage. And then these 2 units fit right in for Invoker and Dragonlord. So it's sort of like a puzzle piece. It just fits in your board super nicely. And Lillia just benefits a lot from the extra AP you get from Sage. Best in slot Lillia for this comp is going to be 1 mana item and 2 AP items. So you could go Shojin, Deathcap, and JG. Instead of Shojin, you could also go Blue Buff, you could also go Shiv, you could also go Adaptive. The 2 AP items are pretty flexible as well. Alternatively, if you don't play around this variation of the board, you could also go back to the standard boards like 4 Bruiser frontline. I think this is like a little bit weaker because they nerfed like Silas, but still pretty good if you get like a free 2-star Silas and you're just flexing like the Sage/Invoker backline where you carry Azir, Morgana, Zyra, etc. Zyra 2 is still a fucking crank. And then alternatively, if you don't play around this variation, you could also play around like the Dragonlord variation as well. So you're just playing like Rakan, Diana, Janna, etc. Alright, so the next comp on the list is going to be Umbral. This comp is especially good with Umbral +1, but I'm going to go over this comp without the crest for now. Basically, you want to play into Umbral if you have like an early game Darius 2 and you're itemizing Darius with AP tank items, so you can move the items over to Silas, or you get dropped in early game Alun. So in the Umbral tree, there are a set of units you usually want to flex around. So how you want to think about this comp is whoever of these units you 2-star, you basically play the corresponding like Umbral unit. So for example, if you're rolling down, you get like a random 2-star Arcane. One of the Umbral units you're playing is probably going to be Yone because it gives you Reaper. Random Ornn 2, you probably want to play the Behemoth. If you get like a random Azir, random Aurelia 2, you probably want to play like the Duelists, you want to play the Loon. You're probably always playing the Loon because a Loon is the broken unit of Umbral in my opinion. And if you get random Nautilus, then you usually want to play the set. Pretty simple. A sample level 7 board is going to look something like this. So like I said before, Ornn 2, you play the Behemoth, and then you get Nautilus 2, you play the Sylas. So if you get the Umbral +1, that's when you really want to play 6 Umbral. So chances are, let's say like you're playing like a Darius or something, and you usually want to Umbral +1 either the Azir or the Irelia, because it gives them the ability to execute. And then your board is actually just like this. You primary tank your Sylas, you primary carry your your Alune with AP items. She's also your Morello holder, and you just put all your leftover items on your set, your Ornn or your Aurelia / Azir. So let's talk about new Ashe variations that popped up. So in the current meta, there are 2 new variations of Ashe you can play. There's Sniper +1 and there is Warden +1. So in the Sniper +1 variant, you generally want to tech in 3 Faded with Syndra, Philios, and Set. In this variation, you usually want to put the Sniper crest on the Syndra. She actually benefits a lot from it just because she usually ends up sending all her orbs to the backline at max range, giving her a ton of damage. 2 best remaining items to put on her are going to be Blue Buff +1 AP item. Generally, you want to link the Syndra and the Aphelios, or sorry, not Aphelios, the set, just because this will give Syndra some Omnivamp, and you're usually itemizing your Ashe anyway, and not your Aphelios. So you generally just don't want to link the Aphelios. The other variation is, if you don't get the set, you can play around Azir as your sniper instead. And with Azir, you generally just want to tech in 2 Invoker. So these 4 snipers will be your backline, and you're still playing around 4 Warden. Additionally, if you get the Warden +1 instead, the board you want to play is going to look something like this. And generally with 4 Warden, you do want to play only around 2 snipers, just because if you play around 4 snipers with 4 Warden, you're kind of playing around too many dead snipers in my opinion. It's much better to just play the 4 Invoker variant, and you could actually put the Warden spat on someone pretty tanky. So like in this variant, generally you're playing around Azir, and if you're playing around Azir, you're usually playing around either a 2-star Annie or a 2-star Ornn. And either of these units are perfect to put your Warden spat on just because they already have so much base HP, or like their ability is really good. Itemization for Ashe is still the same. Guinsoo's Last Whisper and Deathblade. So one really good comp that popped up in the current patch, well, I guess it's always been good, but if you check the stats on Storied Champion in the current patch, getting it at 2-1, the average placement is at 3.81. So I think the moment you get the augment, you double check to make sure no one's playing it, and if no one is playing it, you could probably just hard force this comp, get your free top 2 and get out. Basically, it's like how you play this comp is, I think you really do want to 5-lose into the first minion round, just because you need enough gold to hit the Garen 3. At level 4, 8 out of 10 EXP, you roll till 33 gold for as many Garens as possible. Garen is the only unit that matters. And then you natural the 5, so roll above 50 gold for Garen 3. If you still don't have Garen 3 by stage 4-1, you need to all in for Garen 3 and then push levels. Otherwise, you're just going to bleed out. I think there's 2 ways to itemize Garen. Not really. There's only one way. You just do Titans +2, usually 1 healing and 1 defensive or damage. So for example, according to stats, BIS seems like Titans, Hodge, and Sterix. But you could also go like Titans and BT could be your healing item, and then you go Declaw instead. There's a lot of like AP in the current meta, so Declaw is really, really good. The sort of how this comp plays out is like Garen just scales as the fight goes on, gets infinite HP, and then he just becomes unkillable because every time he casts, he just heals up or gains a shitload of HP. When you push levels, you usually just want to pick up all the Wardens. So you usually play around 6 Wardens like this. One of the Wardens is an Alawi, so it opens you up to Arcanist. So since Garen is a Storyweaver, it's very easy to play into Aurelia and Zoe. Zoe is your second Arcanist, and then Aurelia is really, really good at just spreading anti-heal for your entire team. But yeah, that's pretty much it for Garen. Fucking broken. So on to Zyra Reroll. So this is like a new reroll comp that popped up in the current meta. Basically, you used to reroll around like Shen, Aatrox, and Senna. But now you actually, the variant you want to play around is going to be Zyra instead. And it's good because if you're playing around the Zyra early game, it gives you another option instead of just only playing into like the level 8 Sage Flex board. If you're just playing for a top 4, or you have like, you're really close to some of these 3-star units, you just send it at level 6. Roll for this board. Additionally, like you don't have to go for the Diana. This could be like a Shen too. And at level 6, you slow roll above 50 gold for Aatrox 3, you go for one of Aatrox 3 or Shen 3, and you go for Zyra 3. You really only need one of these tanks in my opinion, but if you get both, you can go for both. It's just because you usually only have enough items throughout the entire game for 3-star or 3-item Zyra, 3-item 1 main tank, and Morello plus Shiv on your Morgana. Even if you 2-star like the Aatrox and the Shen, you're not going to have items on one of them, so it's like not that impactful in my opinion. But basically, once you hit your 3-stars, you push level 8, and then your level 8 board is going to look like this. You have 4 Ghostly, 3 Sage, and 3 Story Weaver. Pretty strong board. I think this comp struggles winning games, but if you have the spot for it, it's usually like a guaranteed top 3. Alright, so on to the Faded Flex board. Faded is still very, very good comp in my opinion, just because it's a comp that does not rely on you hitting any 5-star units. So the standard level 8 board is usually around 5 Faded and 4 Dryad. This comp is super good if you hit the 2 Dryad early, just because by the time you roll down for your 4-2 board, you're already going to have like 500 HP on each of your Dryad units. And the Ornn Thresh tank duo is super good just because so much base HP and shielding, and Ornn just scales off time. The more time the fight goes on, the more items you get for your whole team, and then you just Giga run them over because Syndra just shits on them. There is like a backup board you can play around if you don't hit this exact board. Again, like this is the 4 Arcanist board. This is like the super budget board. And then generally at level 9, you want to play into a board like this. Generally do not want to play into 7 Faded. You want to play around 5 Faded, still 4 Dryad, and you flex around stuff like Annie, Azir, and you also play around. You could also play around Elune as well, because it would give you Umbral for your set and a second Invoker. At level 8, another option you have for rolling down is if you hit the set at level 8, you don't have to play 4 Dryad, you just play into 7 Faded. Still pretty good. I think if you get a spat in this comp, if you get like a Faded spat, you generally play around 7 Faded at level 9. If you get a Dryad spat, you just play around 6 Dryad at level 9 instead. Let's talk a little bit about itemization. So in this comp, depending on if you're very far from Ornn 2, you just fully itemize the Thresh. If you hit Ornn 2, you just itemize the Ornn. Kindred is going to be your anti-heal / shred spreader in this comp. And for Syndra, there are 2 different ways to itemize her. You could just go the traditional blue buff build, which is blue buff Nashor's +1 AP item. You don't have to go blue buff. You could also go Shojin, which is just fine. You could also go adaptive as your mana item. Or you could go double adaptive and 1 damage. So I don't know the math behind this, but apparently this is really good. It gives her just the right amount of casts or autos before she casts again. I'm no mathematician, but yeah, just keep these in mind. Depending on your item economy, you go one or the other. That's pretty much it for Faded. On to the next comp. So aside from like the Warden variant and the Sniper variant, you also have like the standard Invokers and the Porcelain. So generally, if you're just playing around Ashe without any +1s, the variation you want to play around is usually going to be around 4 Invokers, just because Kog'Maw fits in really well. You have Elune to flex with Sylas, and then you also have Azir. Additionally, you could also play around 4 Porcelain if you hit the Lissandra at 8, which is kind of unlikely. I also don't think, personally, I don't think it's as strong as this variant, just because you kind of lack like a lot of frontline. I think this variant is a lot better if you have the Porcelain +1. That way you could just drop the Shitter Lux and then just move the Porcelain spat onto the Annie. Going back to the Kaisa board, it's actually just the same as usual. Not really going to go into much detail. Default board is 4 Bruiser and 4 Trickshot backline. I think the Bruisers are a bit weaker just because they nerfed Sylas. But level 9, you just throw in a 3rd Ink Shadow, probably Udyr. The 2 other variants you want to consider are dropping out of 2 Trickshot, which is something you do not want to do unless you hit the Azir. If you hit the Azir, then it's fine to do so, because then you'll actually have enough damage to back it up. You play Elune Azir. Elune gives your backline a lot of attack speed. Azir is just a good unit, and it combos well with Sylas because it gives them the execute, and Elune spreads Morello very, very well. Additionally, the other variation you can play is around a 2 Warden frontline instead. Set and Nautilus are pretty good units, and the Umbral is also pretty good for your frontline as well. So on to the Heavenly variants. Pretty much would only play this comp if you have a Heavenly +1. Basically, you want to Heavenly Spat the Kayn, and then you go GA +1 usually. Personally, I like going GA plus Hodge, but I think GA plus Last Whisper is good. It's just that you kind of don't have any healing if you don't hit the Wukong, because you really need Sage, and it gives your frontline a bit of healing. If you don't have healing, sometimes your Kayn just dies randomly, and I usually think like the win con for these fights is for Kayn to be the last one alive and go infinite. Morgana is going to be your Morello spreader in this comp, and also synergizes very well with Kayn because she's a ghostly unit. To cap out your board, you go 9 and you end up playing Aurelia. She's just a very good secondary carry. holds stuff like Deathblade, Gunblade, Runaan's Red buff really, really well if you don't already have the Morello. And Wukong is also like your secondary carry as well. You check in the Rakan. Rakan is good because you get Altruist, and also opens you up to like playing another Dragon Lord like Lee Sin instead of Aurelia, or if you want to play a third Sage, you play Diana. It's pretty much it for the Heavenly comp. I guess if you don't have the spat, you just drop out of like all the shitter Heavenly units and you just play valuable 4-cost units like Ornn, Annie, Silas. Yeah. Okay, one comp that I didn't mention in the intro, but I think is very good right now is going to be Duelists. I think just playing around 6 Duelists, like if you had a lot of Volibears, Tristana, usually a safe top 4. But if you get a Duelist +1, it opens up the comp to like a very, very high cap because it lets you go level 8 and play around Aurelia carry with 8 Duelists, and you usually just shit on the entire lobby. For this comp, you play into it if you get like the Darius opener, pretty good. And then if you natural like a lot of Volibears, a lot of Tristanas, you would just slowly just play into this comp at level 6 or 7 and then slow roll for Volley and Trist 3. Itemization wise, Tristana really wants Last Whisper +2 damage, so Runaan's good, GS, Gunblade, IE is also very good as well. I said GS already, right? And then for Volibear is a drain tank. So it's usually like Titans, 1 healing, and then the third item could be Flex. It could be like Crown Guard, it could be Spark. If you have like too many tiers and rods, Archangel is also really good because Volibear like scales off AP and he usually scales off time as well, which is what Archangel does. If you have the +1, you just go 8 and then you play into 8 Duelists. So in the beginning, you just want to find the Aurelia and then you Duelist spat the Diana. But eventually you want to play stuff like Rakan, you play stuff like Wukong, and then if possible, you do want the Duelist spat on the Wukong, but generally most of the time it's just going to be on your Diana. It's usually too expensive to move the Duelist spat over from the Diana onto the Wukong towards the late game anyway if you're spending all your money to go for 3-star Triss and 3-star Volibear. Alright, so this sums up my flex guide for patch 14.10b. If you guys enjoyed this video, as always, would really appreciate the YouTube sub or follow on Twitch. By the time this video is posted, I will be streaming, so would really appreciate it if you guys check me out. And I'll see you guys next time.